Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Protecting Your People When Returning to Work webinar. As a reminder, all calls will be in listen-only mode. If you have questions during the presentation, we encourage you to submit your questions at any time by typing them in the questions section of the GoToWebinar console. We recommend that you expand the viewing window to full screen mode by using the Zoom drop-down box in the upper corner of your screen. This session will be recorded and made available to participants after the call. Now I'd like to introduce Darren, Head of Product and Marketing for CNL. Go ahead, Darren.
Thank you, Carrie. So I'd like to introduce the presenters for today. I joined CNL in 2019 to lead marketing and product, and I joined from a technology company where I'd been advising clients on digital and marketing transformation. I've worked in marketing and product roles for most of my career. We're also joined by Annie Azrari, who works in product management for Everbridge and oversees everything from vision through to execution for the open ecosystem. This also includes integrating Control Center across Everbridge. And Control Center is the name of the CNL product. Over the last 11 years, Daniel Bloodworth has covered most aspects of the physical security software development, sales, and deployment processes. So he's seen the industry evolve and learn from our clients on how our platform can deliver optimal value, and really in the most convenient and effective way. So what we'll be talking through today will be hopefully following a discussion format. So as Carrie said, please submit questions because we will be looking to answer those throughout the presentation. And we'll be highlighting how organizations can connect their physical devices to create real-time situational awareness and rapid actionable insights. And what that really means is how can you use technology to ensure that you know exactly what's going on at the right time and that you can action it at an appropriate time. Because the focus should always be on keeping people safe and secure and ensuring your business operations keep running. So to that, we'll cover off managing operational challenges. And I think it's fair to say we've seen a kind of evolution throughout the COVID-19 pandemic in terms of how our clients both use technology, but how do they address these critical events that are happening? And Annie will talk in a little bit more detail of what critical events really are and how Everbridge manages those. In terms of return to work, we'd really like to cover off both the practical as well as the technological side, because it's really important that managing a safe passage for people to start engaging in the workplace is obviously incredibly difficult. So we'll touch on a number of things there. We'll also talk about how Control Center can help organizations to manage the return to the workplace. And then we'll summarize this with 5 key takeaways to ensure that we have a fairly summarized discussion of what is a complex topic. Now, during the COVID-19 pandemic, we've really seen things evolve both from a public health and global economic perspective. And when we're talking to clients, what we're hearing from executive teams is that there are 3 critical questions at the top of their agenda that we've really been working with them to try and address. And that is, are we safe? Are we secure? And are we in control? Safety and security scrutiny has been far more intense during the pandemic than before, and is likely to continue beyond the pandemic. Because as we've heard, it's not really just about the COVID-19 pandemic in terms of what we're seeing in society. When we think about returning to the workplace, executives may have many questions that they're looking to answer to understand how they can safely and securely return their people. This could be employees, customers, suppliers, visitors, and so on. So we've really got to look at people in the broadest sense. And executives often have a number of questions related to this. When is the right time for employees to return? Is it the same as what governments are saying, whether that be federal or local, national or local? Which employees should be able to return to the workplace? Is there a specific percentage? How is that then managed, particularly when we look to protect employees? How do we ensure the workplace is safe and secure? And what role can testing play in making workplaces safer and ensuring that privacy always remains in place? And finally, and this is by no means least, how can we look after employees' well-being? Obviously, they'll have many concerns, and this will vary according to the employee's experience. During this webinar, you'll hear information that should really help you to provide control in managing the safety and security of your workplace. In terms of the operational challenges that one has seen, but also should expect to continue to see, is really looking at all the different aspects that we've seen during COVID-19. And while pandemics may have topped many national risk management frameworks, not all organizations or even governments were prepared for the kinds of operational challenges that we've seen. We then need to take the lessons learned during COVID-19 to date and ensure our organizations are prepared for the next critical event, which could be a global flu outbreak. There's certainly news around that at the moment, a terrorist attack, civil unrest, the list goes on and on, which is why resilience must stay on the organizational agenda from a strategic, operational, and financial perspective. We really can't lose the lessons that we've learned during this pandemic, because whilst it's disrupted the world, we've also seen how interconnected and interdependent we all are. With so much sudden change, we've had to put people first and ensure that our organizations are enforcing risk management, compliance, safety and security to protect our brands. So you'll see quite often where brands are actually taking a much stricter approach to how they manage the safety and security of their workforce than some governments are applying to their citizens. I'll now introduce Annie Azrari from Everbridge, who will talk us through how, as a company, we are relevant to managing critical events.
Thank you, Darren. Everbridge is a software provider, software as a service, and with two missions and two missions only, keeping people safe and businesses running faster. It seems like now, with the pandemic, that mission is even more clear than ever. Next. So Everbridge traditionally has been monitoring for events around the world. Those events could be things like active assailants, inclement weather, natural disasters such as tsunamis, hurricanes, tornadoes, service disruptions, civil unrest, even IT outages. And we know that these critical events are happening all the time, impacting our clients, businesses, and the life safety of their employees constantly. Next, please. We also know that our clients have a set of things, set of assets that they care about. Those assets could be all of their people, their employees, their travelers, lone workers, visitors, office buildings, manufacturing facilities, bank branches, retail branches, key suppliers. Those are the things that our customers really care about. And the risk events, as I mentioned, are happening all over the world. Those things could be both natural disasters or man-made disasters. Natural disasters, examples of natural disasters, again, are things like tsunamis, tornadoes, hurricanes, earthquakes. And examples of man-made disasters are things like active assailant, terrorist attacks, civil unrest. And we know that those bad things are impacting the life safety and business continuity of our customers. Whenever we have one of those bad things intersect with our customers' assets, we have what we call a critical event. So we need to provide our customers with the tools to mitigate and eliminate the risk to their assets when one of these critical events occur. Example of a critical event that's impacting our customers today is the pandemic. There's a lot of complexity around the pandemic. We know that organizations are trying to get a handle on all of that complexity as it constantly changes. So we are coming up with an approach to help organizations recover and get back to their operations faster. The first piece of that is to give them the information they need. They need to know their landscape. They need to know the impact. And then the second tenet, and perhaps the most important one, is to protect their people and their people. And then combining first and second by putting processes in place to recover operations, that's the third tenet. So as we go through this presentation, we want to show you exactly the tools that we can provide to help organizations get to that third step, recover operations and reopen businesses. Next, please.
Annie, it's Darren here. How do you manage such variations in how the pandemic has affected different places and people?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the pandemic is changing all the time. We are learning new things about the virus. We are also seeing a changing landscape. We are seeing that places that initially had the surge are now managing the virus, and then other places are experiencing a resurgence of the virus. We are also seeing diverse and different regulations and processes for reopening. All of that means that organizations need to be able to leverage products and software that allows them to handle that complexity. They need to have the flexibility to change their standard operating procedures as the regulations change. And that's what we would love to show the audience today about how we can accomplish that. So as we mentioned, the pandemic is constantly changing. We are seeing a resurgence in certain areas. We are seeing lockdowns. Places that had gone through some phases of reopening are now pulling back and maybe not reopening to the next phase. We are seeing different approaches around the world, and not just from country to country, but even in the US, we are seeing state to state different approaches to reopening organizations, both public and private. Next slide, please. So as we are noticing that each state and each country has a different phased opening, what happens to an organization that has more than one location, perhaps in multiple countries? There are many organizations that have operations in multiple countries and multiple states. How will they plan for reopening their offices, their facilities? Because each state or each country is going to have a different set of rules. This makes it very difficult for organizations. So we have an organization with two, three, four, or more locations, and those locations could be in different places. Some may have earlier opening guidelines, and others may have later opening guidelines. Some may be in phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. And these organizations need to be able to have processes in place, standard operating procedures in place to respond to the regulations in all of those locations, not just one of them. Next, please. Next slide, please. Yeah. So at Everbridge, we have been working on a critical events management to handle the complexity and provide our customers with the flexibility to create appropriate processes and return to work. As you know, the Everbridge platform has been able to pull in events and curate a risk data from a region perspective all the way to a block or campus. We do that by monitoring risk around the world. We have a risk intelligence monitoring center with over 50 analysts. We are monitoring 22,000 sources of risk data, and we are curating a risk data feed for all of our clients. However, organizations are not just watching the outside world, they also need to know what's happening within their own premises. They need to know within a campus, within a building, on a floor, in a specific room. So they have systems in place such as access controls, intrusion detection, fire alarm, CCTVs, and they need to bring in information from those systems as well to monitor the risk from inside of those buildings. So with Control Center, we are able to expand the scope of CEM and watch for external events as well as internal events, and provide organizations with a holistic view so that they can build their standard operating procedures, not just for one type of event, but also keep in mind that things could happen from inside, from outside, and have plans for both. Next slide, please. So, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Everbridge Control Center here, certainly for people who've been interacting with CNL for a while, is Everbridge Control Center a new product?
Everbridge Control Center. Go ahead, Daniel, please.
Yeah, I think that's quite an easy one, Darren. Whilst it is a new product launch, it is at its core a CNL IP Security Center. So we're transitioning to a new branding as part of Everbridge's acquisition of CNL, but at its core, it's the same platform that builds upon that 15 plus years of experience of doing system integration.
Excellent.
Thanks.
Everbridge Control Center is designed, to take in a lot of inputs from many different systems: access controls, fire alarm, intrusion detection, gunshot detection, CCTVs. All of those inputs are coming into the Control Center platform. They get processed, they get correlated, and then they trigger, the thresholds will trigger certain actions. Those actions could be creating an alert, maybe automating a workflow, visualizing something on a map, or even controlling the other devices within that organization, such as locking doors or pointing cameras in a certain direction. So Control Center is a very powerful product that really helps expand CEM. Next, please. So let's take a look at some of the things that you can do with Control Center today. Number one, you can control all of your assets through a single common operating platform. So a holistic environment, and it gives you a holistic environment and not an isolated system. This is really important because we know that people in a GSOC are faced with information overload. They're expected to be monitoring systems like access controls, CCTV, expected to be monitoring things like intruder detection, video analytics. And as the pandemic is going on, there are probably a lot of other point solutions that organizations expect these operators to monitor. So having everything come into a single common operating platform certainly helps with preventing some of that information overload. It also helps reduce the organization's risk by making sure that the appropriate processes are taken when a certain situation happens and a threshold is triggered. We want that response to be consistent. We want to avoid human error, and we want standard operating procedures that have previously been created to get activated. Another important use case here with Control Center is to automate actions, such as activating response teams and triggering instructions to other systems to accelerate response times. We want to reduce the time to respond to an incident. And with the automation in place, that can be achieved. It's also important to note that organizations want to avoid being locked into a certain technology or hardware. Control Center allows organizations to have technology from many different providers, best of breed, and bring everything into a common operating platform and not be locked into a certain brand or have to replace everything when they want to upgrade to a different brand. So Control Center already has 250 integrations, 250 plus integrations, which really helps with that. And finally, Control Center allows organizations to improve efficiencies and keep all of their stakeholders informed. It's important to note that when a critical event happens, you have different groups of stakeholders. You have your organizations have their own customers, their executive team, perhaps a legal team, a response team. There are many different stakeholder groups, and they all need to stay informed and get the right type of information. With Control Center, those workflows and the information that each of those stakeholders receive can be automated. And basically, if you're a legal team or if you're a response team, you don't get the same information as, say, the customers of that organization. All of that can be configured and put in place. All right, so now with Control Center, what are some of the use cases or workflows that we can put in place to help organizations with reopening and getting back to work? There are some use cases that are really important. We are seeing organizations want to monitor density in their offices or capacity in their offices because they don't want everyone to go back at the same time, because that would create risk, more of a risk for all of those employees. So they want to have a phased reopening approach, maybe allow only 25 or 50% of the workforce to return. And we are seeing a lot of organizations using temperature or thermal imaging as employees enter their offices or their facilities. And there are a lot of workflows around building safety and ensuring that people stay safe and they social distance when they return to the facilities. I would love to hand it over to Daniel to go into each use case and share with us how Control Center can help with each of these use cases and scenarios.
Thank you, Annie. Yeah, like you just said, Annie, technology, when used in the right way, we've definitely seen it being able to help some of our customers meet some, if not all, of the challenges that returning to work is imposing on everyone. But the key is that the technology on its own doesn't really solve anything. It requires intelligent implementation in order to really be effective, rather than just creating more islands of data with no integrated plan for how to really use it, no plan of how those different stakeholders are going to leverage that information, make best use of that information, how they can make the best informed decisions. And what we're hoping to do today is to just look through a few examples to show how Control Center can help with that. It can help by pulling all of that information together and providing that common operating picture, and ultimately how it can help keep people, visitors, customers, whoever it might be, that are the people that we care about, how we can keep them safe and our business secure.
So Daniel, in terms of managing security across any size of organization, we all know it's very hard, even when there hasn't been a global pandemic going on. What is it that people should really be thinking about?
Yeah, you're right, Darren. I mean, the job of ensuring people and everyone staying safe is hard enough at the best of times, right? But the importance of particularly the leadership team knowing that their staff, their assets, their locations are safe and secure, it's never really been more important than it is today. Whenever a critical event happens, it's often a little bit chaotic, and there's typically a large number of questions that start getting asked all across the organization, across all the different tiers. What we've traditionally seen is that many organizations still work on quite a tactical level, which is risking quite significant delays in that effective decision making, let alone making the best informed decisions. They may end up making wrong decisions because they're operating in a state of panic, reacting to situations as they unfold, rather than proactively preparing for them. And returning to work is just such an example. I mean, I don't know many places that were perfectly prepared, wherever they may be in the world, for returning to work. Everyone started off by learning as they went along a little bit, but those who've handled it best are those who've had at least the foundations of the processes in place, that they can then tweak and refine as the days go on, rather than starting from scratch on day one. And it's equally important for organizations to know when something isn't happening. So if you're faced with an overwhelming amount of bad data, false alarms, uncurated data, then that can prevent an organization from running, or at the very least running efficiently as according to the plan that you've put in place. And again, that's really where technology can really contribute the most, and it's where Control Center can really help, by enabling the organizations to make the best informed decisions by having the right information in the hands of the right people at the right time. And that's helpful in order to provide what, from a business perspective, is what we've seen a really important challenge as well. In this time of uncertainty, organizations, they really need to generate the trust from both internally and externally, from people, whether that be employees or visitors or customers. And they can only really do that by being transparent, by being inclusive, by being dynamic and responsive to change, and where everyone is playing a part of a holistic decision-making process, rather than being very, very fixed and very rigid as it historically has been previously. I guess to speak in terms of how Control Center really is helping the return to work for some of our clients, we've already mentioned about the large number of existing out-of-the-box integrations, but really where Control Center fits so perfectly within the CEM framework and the ability to best serve our customers' holistic needs is, as Annie said on the previous slide, by acting as that connectivity hub on premise for our customers to connect into their real-time systems, whether that be video analytics or access control or CCTV or facial recognition, whatever it might be, by providing that local hub for all of that data, analyzing that data, and being able to then best serve it out to the people who need to use it to make decisions. What I'll do is I'd just like to run through just a few examples that we've seen of how Control Center can help in the return to work manner. First example here is a very, very simple one which we've seen quite commonly, both with and without Control Center. But it's very simply just using the access control data that's available from most of our customers. I mean, most people have some form of access control within their organization. And what Control Center brings above and beyond just the access control system is the ability to add intelligence to that access control system, depending on how complex or how advanced the native system is itself. and also by being able to aggregate together multiple different access control systems. So a large number of our customers, Annie mentioned, when you've got locations in different states, different countries, different cities, we know that it's often quite difficult to standardize on a single vendor for all of those access control systems, or even if it's a single vendor, they may still run as independent systems. What Control Center does is it correlates the data from all of those different systems, or all of those different manufacturers. So if, as your local regulations dictate, or the guidelines state, there's different capacities for different locations. My Boston office might be operating at 30% capacity, but my Dubai office is operating at 50% capacity, and so on. What Control Center can do is we can apply those profiles to each of the locations within your operating environment, because we can see all of those different locations through that common operating picture. And we can apply those different thresholds, and when employees use cards or the access control system to access any given location, Control Center will update the active occupancy of that particular location to make sure that it's still within the threshold of local compliance. And again, it's important to highlight that the flexibility there, it can't be a rigid system. We know that today it might be, we're operating at 30%, tomorrow it might be 50%, then the day after it might be 30% again. These things are changing on a regular basis. So we've got the tools in the platform that we'll see a little bit later on that allow us to make those updates and manage those updates very flexibly within the system. And the other side of it, I guess, is what happens when you get more people than you expected. What happens when you reach the threshold capacity? Firstly, we can obviously look at who's already inside that location. We can correlate the access control swipes with the HR system in order to send out notifications, send out emails, contact everyone who's currently in that location to let them know that that your particular location which you are in is now above what's considered the safe capacity threshold today. We may want to start asking non-essential staff who are in that location to move to a different location, which of course we can recommend, because we have the real-time occupancy of all of the neighboring locations. So if there's another floor, for example, which has a lower capacity, we might advise people to say, well, this meeting should really be moved to that floor now in the next hour, because that will bring us back within the threshold range. And for other customers, of course, not everybody's the same. Some people might want to do more than just send out a notification. They might want to go further in terms of making sure that their employees or their visitors feel updated, make sure that they feel like they are being kept up to date with the latest lay of the land in the location that they're in. And that's where we can tap into public address systems, digital signage boards, make sure that everybody there knows the situation, they know what's going on. And of course, for some of our customers, it can happily be a combination of all of the above. And all of that can be performed automatically. So the users of Control Center are simply monitoring what's happening, making manual adjustments as required, but they're doing that on exception rather than having to actively sit there and add to their workload and manage every location in real time. And they can do all of that from within the same common operating picture. And from an operational perspective, the only change in this scenario that we see an organization making is making that policy change, so that whilst you may normally swipe into the office or into the location in the morning using the access control and then just walk out freely at the end of your day or at the end of your shift, just swipe out so that the system can have an accurate tally of who is where at any given time.
It's probably worth asking, Daniel, I suppose the purpose here is to actually prevent any infringements happening. What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, for sure. We've seen some organizations that have very, very strict policies over breaching those capacity limits, where simply just keeping people informed isn't enough. They need to be able to actually prevent it from happening. And of course, that's possible too. Since we're already connected to the access control system in order to receive the data, we can, of course, control it in the same way as we always have from a security perspective. So if the system is deemed that it's reaching or it's reached full capacity, we can use the same logic that we've always used for lockdown scenarios for active shooters in order to just lock down those doors and say, sorry guys, no more people can come in until some people leave. And that's again dependent on the organization's policy to say how they want to handle these different situations depending on their environment. And of course, what we just saw with access control, it's not perfect. I think we already covered that there is no perfect solution to every scenario. And whilst most people probably have some sort of access control, we've also seen some organizations, both public and private, already starting to adopt video analytics for various different pre-pandemic use cases where they were actually adding business value to their organization. And what we've seen again from some of our clients is that many of those systems can be quite easily repurposed to either act as an alerting system on their own, for example, in a sports venue or in a shopping mall or something like that, in order to detect overcrowding, for example, or as a double knock kind of validation. So when the access control system in an office tells us we think there's too many people in here, then we've got a second reference point from the video analytics to either confirm that yes, that probably is the case. We can see that there's a lot of people here. It's not quite overcrowding, but yes, there's a lot of people. Or it might say, actually, there's not really here, and maybe the algorithm that we're using is not accurate, or people have been going out without swiping out. One of the other use cases that we've seen for video analytics is with the use of facial recognition. Whilst it's obviously got its traditional benefits, we've also seen it being able to, again, complement access control data in locations where access control is available, but in the case of public spaces, act as a really useful tool for contact tracing when that is required. And I should stress at that point, since we're talking about that, then yeah, of course, all the data within Control Center is securely archived. So whether we're talking about the access control logs or the analytics or your Active Directory logs or everything that Control Center has visibility of, it's securely archived in the Control Center data store.
And with regards to privacy concerns, could you address that with regard to facial recognition?
Yeah, sure. I mean, facial recognition has been hotly debated for quite some time now in terms of the privacy concerns. But from our perspective, what we've seen and what a lot of our customers have seen is that it doesn't really need to be the case. A good facial recognition system doesn't really need to know who you are, Darren. Like, they just need to know that this is your face, and they'll use that as an identifier to figure out where else that face has been and who else that face came in contact with. Associating faces to names or identities is, well, I mean, it's useful in corporate situations where you might want to use it for access control or something like that. But from a privacy perspective, it's not so relevant in a public situation, because if you're already captured on CCTV, actually having a snapshot of the same face from the CCTV doesn't really make that much difference. It's just aiding the users in terms of being able to accelerate that contact tracing process. And of course, there's plenty of other types of technology as well that can help and that may add value depending on the type of location that you're operating. I mean, it should be, I say that tongue in cheek, but it should be simple enough to control the number of people. If you're a cinema, have a number of people in each screen by limiting ticket sales or something like that. But what if you're a theme park? What if you're a water park? What if you're somewhere that sells day passes? How do you control how many people are inside at any given time? Well, what we've seen is that all of that data is actually there in the ticketing system, and using that data transparently to update things like the same signs that you might normally use to show expected queue lengths can be used to display how close the location is to reaching its threshold on that given day. So again, it's about that transparency, it's about that communication, making sure that people's expectations can be managed as best possible, I should say. And once those people are inside, how do you ensure that those people are complying with safety regulations that different places have put in place? If there is a requirement in your area that people should be wearing masks, how do you detect that? How do you make sure that people are observing social distancing? And again, that's where we've seen technologies such as video analytics step in, and they've been able to update their algorithms to notify control center so that any violations can be escalated and the people prompted to comply with the regulations in the appropriate way.
Daniel, if I could just ask an audience question here. So we've seen a lot of attention around thermal screening recently. Could you just address that as part of this?
Yeah, sure. It's obviously a very, pardon the pun, hot topic at the moment. But we've been working with a number of thermographic camera manufacturers and systems, both for public and private space clients recently. And again, it's really important to stress that without PCR testing literally every single individual coming into your workplace on a daily basis, which obviously is not feasible, then there is no single solution. We know that symptoms vary from person to person. Not everyone develops a fever, but thermal screening, similarly to all of the other examples that we're giving, can be used in order to detect people who might feel a little bit off their game, but they're not showing other symptoms. Again, I should stress that most of these systems, when we're talking about thermographic screening, are not actually designed, obviously, again, just to be clear, to confirm whether someone actually has a fever. And obviously they can't detect whether someone has COVID-19, but they are useful as just another layer, just reducing that risk a little bit further, same as everything else, so that anyone with a high temperature can be perhaps briefly isolated, given a more thorough examination by a medical professional. And again, it's really important that I just keep stressing this. It's about using as many different modalities as possible, as many different technologies as possible to iteratively reduce the risk by reducing layers upon layers of risk. And with Control Center, we can act as the hub to aggregate all of those different data streams and to help the security teams operating the environment to ensure that they're being best practices are being followed, and that adhering to the procedures put in place of the organization. I think Annie mentioned building management systems earlier. A similar thing applies there. Even things like monitoring the BMS to make sure that the environment is operating in accordance to appropriate ventilation guidelines is something that we've seen users requesting. And like you said, Darren, earlier on, working in or being responsible for security is stressful enough. It's even more stressful at the moment. And it's stressful enough without the added pressure of liability being added onto that. So that's a key thing which we're trying to alleviate as well, by just ensuring that compliance to whatever the policies are in whichever country or whichever region you're in. Hopefully that answers the thermographic screening question as best as I could. And actually, speaking of responsibility, that quite nicely leads us on to our last use case here. In cases where our customers are using a self-reporting system or application, Control Center can correlate those reports with things like your calendaring system, your access control system. So if someone has reported symptoms and they should be self-isolating, then Control Center can temporarily disable their access rights so they don't accidentally show up in the office too early, or it can notify the right people if they book a physical meeting room in the office in the calendar in order to give them a call and say, you shouldn't be coming in quite yet. So how does Control Center really do all of this? How does it work? Well, first, we need to have as much data to work with as possible. I think I've already covered that in terms of the importance of getting as much source data as possible from as many different relevant systems as possible, and going really deep into that data where we're not just receiving high-level notifications, but we're actually accessing the full data set from those systems using that deep driver development kit that we've got to understand the full picture of what's going on and what it means to the organization. For the use cases we discussed today, I mean, that could be your access control system, your CCTV, your video analytics, your face recognition, your calendar, travel, ticketing, contact tracing, the list goes on. Again, the more modalities, the better, and we can take that data to get it to the right people and to ensure a better outcome. But to prevent the information overload that Annie mentioned earlier, all of that data needs to be analyzed and verified before being presented to the right people. And that's what our analysis engine really does. And when we actually do need to take action, we need to make sure that all of the information is available at the fingertips of the people who need it. Who was the last person to walk into this floor? Who was it? Who was the last person to swipe their card on this door? Make sure that the most important information is available at the fingertips of the people who need it, and make sure that the process that's being followed is achievable without switching between lots of different isolated systems, again, introducing the risk of human error, particularly during a time of high stress and crisis, as we're seeing today. And doing all of this enables those actionable insights to reduce the response times and to ensure that the best informed decisions are made in accordance with the policies and the procedures that often are defined by organizations as part of their risk management framework. So over the years, the definition of what a system like this really looks like has been quite challenging, but today we're really seeing the emergence of the importance, even more so, or I shouldn't say emergence, the solidification of these different tiers, these different pillars upon which the system is built. All of them are adding significant amounts of value, both in terms of return to work, but also in terms of people's understanding now of the different dimensions of security and risk management. I'm conscious that I've been talking for quite a long time, Darren. In terms of the Everbridge Control Center platform, like you mentioned earlier, built on the CNL IP Security Center platform, the reasons why our customers choose us, quite often, it comes down to a number of different reasons. We've got a very high performant architecture platform that's been in use for well over a decade now, that supports some of the largest federated deployments all over the world. It's an open platform, and that's really important to stress as well. So we're not tied to other manufacturers of whether it's access control or CCTV or whatever it might be. We're a completely neutral platform that has a open driver development kit to enable anyone to really create new integrations to the Control Center platform. We don't provide any vendor lock-ins, and we do not reduce the initial value of the investment in the technology. The platform also comes with inbuilt tools. So if you need to make adjustments to forms or different parts of your user experience, the tools are there in the system in order to allow you to do that. And as we talked about today, the importance of being able to change the workflows and the logic that drives all of the automated decision making, all of that can be controlled using the inbuilt workflow editor. So if today you're operating in this way, tomorrow you might be operating in a different way. You don't need to install a new version, you don't need to patch, you don't need to make changes to the core platform itself. You can use the visual drag and drop tools in order to make those adjustments. And of course, we've got global deployments all over the globe. We've got offices in 3 different continents as CNL, and of course much broader with as part of the Everbridge family now. And every office has a very experienced team who've been part of the journey, who've been part of delivering these mission critical projects for over 15 years now. And it should go without saying, hopefully, that from a security and compliance perspective, we've got multiple certifications from various third-party auditors, and it's been used and tested and trusted by some of the most high security environments all over the world.
Thank you, Daniel and Annie. I think for everybody listening today, what we've seen is as the pandemic evolves, it reveals opportunities for immediate action to prepare for the future. I think as Annie has discussed, and then as Daniel has shown from a product perspective, without automation, some of the challenges that we're facing around COVID-19 and the ongoing crises that we'll face or critical events, I think the better security executives will positively use this experience to convince their boards, but also all colleagues that a focus on safety and security is really essential. It's not a nice to have. Being prepared for ongoing global crises, they must be proactively managed. And I think any lack of preparedness and responsiveness going forward will become increasingly unforgivable by the general public and employees, now that everybody has experienced what a global pandemic can do. So our 5 key takeaways are really around being safe and secure, meeting the challenges head on, and really looking at proactive control rather than reactively addressing any issue that surfaces. And really, this is a message to anybody working in safety and security that interacting commercially with their management team is essential, because as we've rightly said, this should be on the board agenda. So driving timely responses to safeguard your people, facilities and assets is really a message that we strongly want every participant to take away today. Preparing your organization for the next crisis, which we believe will happen on an ongoing basis. But if you're currently battling today's battles with quick fixes, prepare to think strategically. As Daniel said, this can't all be tactical. So thank you very much for listening today. I hope that we've given you some issues and solutions to consider. And please do reach out to us if you need any further information. Thank you.